Hello all, this is your Professor Ian. This is a hopefully short video on quoting and what I call a quote sandwich. You might have heard that term before, hopefully. So anyways, the question we're trying to answer here in this video is how do I quote? How do I quote well? How do I quote appropriately for an academic essay? So, a couple of rules to begin with. Don't start a paragraph with a quote. Don't end a paragraph with a quote. And just, one or two fairly short quotes per paragraph is what you want to aim for. These are not golden rules. You can break these, but these are good guidelines, especially as you're, practicing your quoting skills, right? When you begin or end a paragraph with a quote, it makes it hard to introduce the quote. It makes it hard to analyze the quote. And if you quote too much in your paragraph, then you're just cutting and pasting someone else's words into your own writing, and you can't do any analysis. So, a well-integrated quote is a lot like a sandwich, so hence quote sandwich. On top, you have a sentence that is your thought or summary or context plus context for the actual quote. Then you have the quote with a tag or a signal phrase or blended into your own words. And then on the bottom, you have your analysis of the material. So, a quote sandwich, right? Context on top, a quote in the middle, and then an analysis following afterwards. You always want to have these three parts whenever you're quoting from a text. If you don't have the context, then it's hard to tell where the quote's coming from, why you're using it. If you don't have the analysis, then you're not doing the analytical work that's really required of you in an academic essay. If you just, introduce a quote, drop it in, then don't do anything with the quote, that's not really doing the work that you want to do in your essays. So, what is a dropped quote? This is the big question we have here. Sometimes called dumped quotes. They are direct textual evidence that stands alone as a sentence or sentences, or incorporated into sentences in a grammatically incorrect way, right? So I think I have an example. In Mother Tongue, which we've read, Tan points out that her mother reads complex text in English, even though her spoken English was not very clear, right? So that's my argument about the essay. It's good. And then, instead of introducing a quote, I have a dropped quote, right? So it's a sentence that stands alone as a quote. She reads the Forbes report, blah, 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 right? So it stands alone as a sentence. That's an example of a dropped quote. And the problem here is they demonstrate a lack of mastery over the material. I don't really show that I understand why I'm using that quote in my example there. They don't supply enough context for the quoted material. They don't tell the reader, here's why I'm using this quote. They make your writing look unpolished and lazy. They leave the reader asking questions that you, as the writer, should have answered, right? Who's saying this? Why are they saying this? What's the context? My golden rule to remember is that readers are lazy creatures, right? I'm the same way when I'm reading, especially if I'm reading for information, if I'm reading an essay or, an academic piece or something like that, or a report on something, right? If I'm reading for pleasure, say I have Harry Potter, I might enjoy and read every single word and chuckle over certain descriptions. But if I'm reading for information, I'm reading at a faster pace. I'm reading to get the information of a sentence. If I have to go back and do work because a quote isn't fully explained to me, right? If I came across this and I read this argument, okay, and then I read this, I'm like, oh, what's the connection? I have to go back and think about it. That's making me as a reader have to do more work with this text than I should have to. You as the writer should be doing that work, making the connection between your argument and the text that you're quoting from to support your argument. So, how do I avoid drop quotes? Some basic ideas. Always integrate quotations into your text. Never just drop a quote like I showed you. Never have a quote stand alone as a sentence. Try to avoid that. Right? So in other words, don't let a piece of textual evidence stand alone as its own sentence. Unless it's multiple sentences, you're doing a block quote, which I'll show you in a minute. Use your own words to introduce a quotation. Right? So there are three ways we can fix dropped quotes. Three methods that I'm going to show you. The first one is the most common, easiest one, using a signal phrase. The second one is you choose keywords and phrases from a larger quote and blend them into your writing. And the third one is using a block quotation, like I just mentioned. So using a larger chunk of text and incorporating that into your writing. Now, the second method that I'm going to talk about is the one you want to try to practice and really try to work on more, because that's the more sophisticated way to work with a text. The first way is fine. We use it all the time, and you can switch back and forth between the first two methods. And the third way, a block quote, is only in specific situations when you are going to use a large chunk of text and you're actually going to analyze that whole chunk. Okay, so first method, using a signal phrase. This is just using some kind of identifier to tell the reader who is speaking or writing. You're just adding a little phrase or word or short sentence that adds context to connect the argument with the quote. So, same argument, a mother tongue. Tan points out that her mother reads complex text in English, even though her spoken English was not very clear. As Tan notes, and then I have the quote. So just those 3 words with a comma adds that context and makes that connection between the argument and the textual evidence that I'm using that much clearer, right? It makes it super, well, maybe not super clear, but it makes it a lot clearer for the reader, right? Suddenly I know, oh, okay, this is Tan writing, even though, from context, that this quote is coming from the essay, et cetera, but this just makes it more clear and does that work for the reader. So some other examples, right? According to, as Jane Doe goes on to explain, characterized by John Doe, the society is, as one critic points out, right? These are all samples of signal phrases. There's a million ways to write a signal phrase in English. It can come before the quote, it can come in the middle of the quote, it can come after the quote. Generally better before the quote in this kind of an essay, an academic essay, but not necessarily in that position, just as long as it's somewhere to add some context and connect the argument with the textual evidence. Some ones you want to avoid, as the following quote proves, as proven by the previous quote, as I quoted previously. Ooh, that's a bad one. That kind of like, call back to things that you've done previously in your writing. These again make your reader do more work than is necessary, and they don't lead to good engagement with the direct textual evidence. So here's just a list. You can look through my PowerPoint notes if you want to look into this more closely. The English language is rich with a variety of words. The English language is an amalgamation of a bunch of languages, so we have tons of different words that mean the exact same thing. We have a lot of synonyms in English. Don't get crazy using all the synonyms just to, make your essay seem like it has a wide vocabulary, but do feel free to use something other than said, right? So the second method to fix a dropped quote, that's blending, right? So choose only the key words and phrases from a larger quote and blend them into your own sentence. Ask yourself, how much of this quote do I really need to prove my point? How much can I paraphrase? And this is an important skill, paraphrasing, that it will help you engage better with texts. You can replace words within reason to fit your own sentence. Signal to your reader that you have done this with square brackets. That's why we use square brackets. When you see a word in square brackets, it means that the writer is quoting from a text using direct textual evidence, but is changing a word here or there just to make it fit with the grammatical construction of their sentence, right? So you can change things like pronouns or the plurality of things, or just little things like that to make it fit in with your writing, the construction of your sentence. You can't change the meaning using square brackets, and you got to be careful using square brackets, but you can change little words. So here's an example. Same passage from Mother Tongue, same argument. In Mother Tongue, Tan points out her mother reads complex text in English, even though her spoken English was not very clear. Tan lists Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, and Shirley MacLaine's book as things her mother reads, and even argues that these are, quote, things I can't begin to understand, end quote. So you can see how I've taken that quote from before. Maybe I can, right? So this long quote, and I've broken it up. I use that last bit because I think that's a good way to phrase it, and I want to use her direct words, and I use her examples, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, MacLaine's book, right? But I put it in my own words. I blend it into my own writing. So this is the gold standard. This is what you want to practice because this shows deeper engagement with the text. Third method is using a block quote. So this is if you, with MLA rules, if you're using a chunk of prose that's more than 4 lines and you put it in a block quotation, you place these quotations in a freestanding block of text and omit quotation marks. That's why it's called a block quote. There's some formatting rules. And make sure you properly introduce the material before the block quote. Again, that quote sandwich is very important for a block quote. You only want to use this if you're going to engage with the whole chunk of text. Don't just do this if really only 3 words are important. Right? Here's an example. When the narrator describes her meager room in one of the first chapters of The Handmaid's Tale, a pattern is established that is used throughout the novel. And then I have this long quote, but the reason I did it here is because this is a long quote with a lot of description about the room, which adds up to this pattern of like a barren, stripped down room that's part of what Atwood is doing with language in The Handmaid's Tale, and I go on to explain that here. And see, I do this, this is all analysis of this passage. So you'd only want to use a block quote if the whole thing is necessary and you're going to do a lot of analysis. Try to avoid block quotes. That's my only advice at this point. Block quotes are great for longer papers when you're really getting into longer analysis of passages. But in shorter papers especially, really avoid drop quotes. They just, it looks, what's the word I'm looking for? It looks like you're trying to fill up your page with direct quotes from a text instead of doing the analysis that is really the important part. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples. Here's a dropped quote. T.S. Eliot, in his essay, The Talent in the Individual, uses gender-specific language. There's my argument. Then I just have a quote. No poet, no artist, blah, 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 blah. So that's a dropped quote. That's a no-no, right? Because it's standing alone as a sentence, not connected to my argument. So I can fix it with a signal phrase. T.S. Eliot, in his Talent in the Individual, uses gender-specific language. He argues, for instance, that, so, I've made this connection between the argument and the quote with just how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words and a couple commas. And suddenly I've got a connection between the argument and the direct textual evidence, which makes things a lot clearer for the reader, right? But I can do better. I can blend it. T.S. Eliot, in his Talent in the Individual, uses gender-specific language. Eliot uses the pronoun his to introduce such artistic qualities as meaning and significance, and Eliot's claims about his, the artist, relation to the dead poets and artists suggest a patronymic ancestry. Right? So I've gone ahead and just blended in my analysis of the text into my own writing. This is a hard skill to pick up. It's not something that comes automatically, right? This is why I'm saying this is the gold standard you want to practice and work towards. But in the meantime, you definitely want to use signal phrases to connect your argument to textual evidence. And you want to experiment with blending your analysis into your own writing so you don't have to use signal phrases in the same way. This is going to lead to better analysis of texts because, I'm doing my analysis as I'm presenting the textual evidence. So it's going to force me to get closer to the text and do more in-depth analysis. I'm using little chunks, and that helps me really get into the textual evidence in a more granular way. I'm getting really close with the text and really analyzing phrases and words rather than just presenting, a whole sentence and making a statement about it, right? So engagement with the text is going to be deeper and more meaningful if I'm blending my text, if I'm blending the textual evidence into my own writing. So that's something you want to practice. Again, it's not something that comes automatically. This is a skill that takes years of writing practice to really get down. But you do definitely want to use signal phrases. So I've included an example of an argument. Again, going back to the Tan essay with a dropped quote. I'm sorry, my mind just blanked there for a second. There's a dropped quote, so you can try going through and fixing that. And then I've got a couple examples of signal phrase, and then I've blended it. So the other last thing I'll say is everybody's attempt at blending a quote is going to look different, right? There's no right answer to blending a quote. There are right answers to using signal phrases, right? There's a million different signal phrases you can use, but we use them in specific ways. Whereas blending a quote gets a lot more personal in your writing style. So if you want to try those, go ahead. You can then check out my right answers or the correct answers with this video or with the PowerPoint slides. And good luck with that. I hope you keep practicing the skills. If you have any questions or concerns, you can of course contact me. Thank you very much.